G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day. Now, like I spoke about yesterday, I am away for a couple of days to do with some family stuff. So I won't be in my studio office, but I will still be updating you with as well as I can be. But you will see me looking off screen a little bit more due to the way I've got my notes laid out differently to how I would at home. But we do have a lot to go over, and something I just want to point out in the beginning is the amount of fog of war happening at the moment is a lot. This is the best news Ukraine has been having since the end of 2022, and the most we see that advancement since Kharkiv, Kherson, and the most amount of ground on the other side that Russia has been losing since then the same period. So there's a lot of panic, there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of propaganda and everything from media to governments to independents feeding into this. And I'm here to say it is hard to know what exactly is actually going on, but in time it will become more clearly. So if there's certain bits of speculation I'm not speaking on, well, that may be because I'm waiting on something. Maybe that doesn't mean it's as exciting. But what I'm going to talk about today, we're going to look at the map, see where things are changing. Of course, up in the north, we actually need to look at then what the Ukrainian government has said about the peace plan and then this peace negotiations we've been talking about at the end of the year, as a lot of that has actually been really backtracked, I feel, on what the messaging was versus what we're hearing now. Now, we actually need to then look at the maps and other situations because, of course, not everything is happening in the north. There's still the Donbas, there's still the south, there's still fighting in a lot of other places. And while all eyes are there, we still need to look at what's happening in other areas because the problems that Ukraine had as far as manpower, weapon shortages, and losing ground in around Pokrovsk, that just hasn't disappeared due to then this northern push, and has it actually exacerbated this? Now, like I said in the beginning, it's difficult to know what exactly is happening. Good thing for me, I've actually had a few people from the ground here reach out and talk about what they're seeing and what is happening, as well as people that I have on this to do some of my intel stuff and opinions. I've got some of that written messages and some messages from the Telegram as well, if you want to come and join, that I found very interesting to share with you about how other people are seeing this. We're going to talk about railways, lines, insurgency forces, counterinsurgency. We have a lot to go over. Now, I want to touch on something I spoke about in the video yesterday. I know that was long and most people dip off somewhere, but this is possible that it is a distraction for larger movements in other areas. And there are rumors on Telegram and rumors on Twitter that there is a Ukrainian buildup in other areas, maybe to cross into Belgorod, maybe somewhere else. And like I said yesterday, it could be something like this. That's originally what we reckon Russia's was, into Vovchansk, into Lipsy in the Kharkiv region, Oblast, for maybe something in Sumy, but that never then went ahead, and that links in with some other pieces. Now, a friend of mine works with a lot of medical units in Ukraine. I can't share his message, but I can share what it was basically saying is he does a lot of field medic work, but the more garrison-type medics, they're actually being deployed into some of these areas. And he said what this is messaging to him at the moment is that this isn't a short in and out, that this is to go in and hold land. So he's saying if they're going in, it's more to actually hold maybe then long term. And that actually then plays in as well with what we spoke about with, are we going to start seeing Ukraine really taking in engineering vehicles, everything, and I'm meaning everything from mine clearing machines to putting mines in to excavators to dig in positions? Because if you're planning on holding, that's what you need to do. And there is a lot of talk that that is occurring, that Ukraine is digging in some regions. So we're going to talk about that, as well as something yesterday I wanted to touch on as well, was a year ago when we saw these first border crossings from the Ukrainian-backed groups into Russia. Of course, this is just the Ukrainian military doing it at this point. Was my friend was telling me at the time that this is a really good way to get saboteurs, or you'll see as DRG, quite commonly written, into Russia. They go in, fog of war, chaos. Those who need to then go out and conduct those operations, it's a good way for them to get in unnoticed in that fog of what is going on. But enough from me. Let's get into some things on what people are saying to me. Now, this is going to be wordy in the beginning, but what this is going to do is set up for later on. So what I will say is, if you're willing to listen to what I'm about to say, watch the rest, because we're going to come back and forward on things. It's a bit of foreshadowing, but you will get me. Now, this was from a guy who's done a lot for me. He's done a lot in Ukraine as well, both fighting and advising the Ukrainian forces. My assessment of the situation is almost identical to a previous Telegram post. Ukraine doesn't have enough reserves and has attacked too far from the Kharkiv axis. The only thing they could possibly achieve is raiding into the enemy rear to try and divert forces away from the front. However, if they remain in place, they will be mauled, and this could turn quickly into another virtual signal salient. Now, this is going into where some people say is then the PR stunt, but it also goes here if they remain in place. What he's saying on this and what I said on Telegram was Ukraine need to continue moving, because if they stop, that allows Russia to then bring in things like the FABs and the artillery, which we know they've got the at least numerical numbers and the overmatch in that. And of course, then I believe Ukraine need to then keep moving. But if they can get into the rear, what potentially are they trying to get into on the rear? We're going to talk about the railways, and we're going to talk about the power station as well. But I want to go over this first from, actually, let's go from on the ground guy as well, Ukrainian. We're recently in Sumy, seeing preparations for the Kursk operation and seeing the usual Charlie Foxtrot, so clusterfuck, exhibited. They usually did not listen on how to suppress enemy's drone surveillance capability and enemy aircraft assets to gain the initiative. And this is something we have seen, is Ukraine has pushed a long way in, but there's been a hell of a lot of surveillance capability from the Russian drones, seeing that occur. And then, of course, that can help then target on the ground. As usual, this was not done to blind the enemy, as it should have been done. They needed to use stingers and other mobile anti-aircraft assets to eliminate the enemy ability to observe and track the expeditionary force. Poor planning leads to losses that are avoidable. Unprofessional and uneducated command leads to ineffective solutions being implemented. That said, Ukraine is making a lot of ground, but we do have a lot of footage coming out of vehicles getting hit as well. But that said, Ukraine has made a lot of ground in, and I'll show you on the maps in a second. I'm just going through these written things to set up a few things. Now, this is one of my guys does a lot too, seeing me stuff both publicly to show like this and behind the scenes. Thank you, you know who you are, very knowledgeable. If you're losing, if your opponent is stronger and pushing you back on the main battlefield and you don't know what to do, make it messy. Stop focusing on the main battlefield. Try attacking your opponent in their home base. Maybe they don't have much military there. Maybe they get confused or start panicking or making mistakes. Maybe you get a chance to turn the tide and win the game. And this is from actually he's quoting someone who's like a world champion on a video game, but this is an interesting piece to look at too. If you're losing on the main battlefield, which Donbas, South main battlefield, Ukraine is losing there, Russia has the initiative there, make it messy and then try and like have a bit of chaos. And this is why we'll look at the power plan as well that people keep pointing to, although I just don't see it. We're going to talk about the peace plan in this too, but the same bloke then continues here. Some more thoughts, a bit more grounded in reality. Russia mobilised something like 150,000 men each year. From memory, it could be wrong, but these are just kids doing their military service and are not supposed to be deployed abroad according to Russian law. Well, according to Russian law, a large chunk of Ukraine is actually Russia, but regardless, the government has promised they wouldn't take part in the special military operation, in quotation marks. So we know that Russia has almost like a national service ballot. A lot of people get called up each year to be trained, no different year to year, whether in the time of conflict or not. But these are to go to like garrison around areas, not participate in like active conflict. But what that has done is it has allowed then the more full-time guys from those areas to move into the conflict. But this plays in. Two, there's a pretty decent possibility that many of them are deployed to the border. If so, by attacking there, Ukraine is bound to wound, capture, or kill most of them. So again, that these are conscript border guards. So kids who probably wanted nothing to do with the war would be dead, leaving grieving mothers and girlfriends, perhaps a few worried widows. That Ukraine has previously stated that the motivation for drone strikes against Moscow's business district was to bring the war to ordinary Russians, to make them understand what it's like. So perhaps this is more of this, trying to make ordinary people with no interest in the war suffer some consequences, hoping they'd turn against Putin. So saying here that a lot of these guys on the border are probably like conscript border guards, whatever, and then it will bring the war home in that way. My question is, does this bring the war into hating Putin? There can be distrust of Putin, distrust of the Kremlin, but it may actually bolster then some of the messaging of why then the forces have entered Ukraine, if that makes sense. But this is interesting to look at too, as we've seen a lot of these being taken POW here on the borders, potentially conscripts, bringing the war home. But what effect does that then actually have overall? So I'm just looking down at my notes. Now, a couple of interesting things from the Telegram. Looking forward to analysis, my opinion is given that a lack of proper paved roads across the border, that Ukraine will be on the downside in the longer term. There are tree lines and villages they can hold out inside of. It will probably be hard to dislodge them, but supply and rotation, especially if Russian aviation goes to work on the one tree line paved roads in the Ukraine side, is going to be a nightmare. This is something we've spoken about, that we're at this 3-4 day period. This is when you need rotation of troops. There's a lot of fatigue. You'll have wounded. You also then are running out of some systems as well. Yes, we have seen videos of looting of water, food, fuel. That stuff just happens in war. It's just going to occur. But there's also certain consumable items that you're going to have more of, specific items. So you need that logistic supply. And could Ukraine be getting way overextended, I think, should be one of the concerns, seeing how far this has gone in. And we'll look then at the maps in 1 second. Just one more here. Most reasonable and realistic sounding explanation of this Kursk offensive that I heard would be simply preemptive strike instead of waiting for the already known and documented planning of Russian Kursk offensive. It smacks the desperation and panic, while at the same time radiates a sense of confidence and success. The most realistic efforts will be delay of the Russian offensive, political bickering, temptation for the Russians to overreact and accelerate, or to overextend, overreact. Looking at the whole picture, it's indeed some all-in move, although Ukraine command might have been confident enough that it would not fail totally right away. The question is left, how much time was needed to buy and why? So if they had an idea that Russia was going to launch, like we had heard about, then an attack in this direction, that you go first, it's bolsters that, yep, you're radiating confidence that we're going in, this is how much power we've got, and delays that and can fuck up that whole plan. So I just wanted to put those out, as then we will speak more in depth on this, and I want to show you the maps and talk about a lot more in here too. So look, there's a lot of maps. It's hard to get an idea, but Deep State Map has finally updated on day 3 or 4 of this operation, really day 4, in here. So this is Ukraine in the center. This is the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, purple since 14, the red check within 24 hours, blue within the last 2 weeks of Ukrainian movement. Now, we come up here, Sumy, Kursk Oblast here. We see then these crossings. This is somewhat less than a lot of other maps are showing. I'm going to show you those other maps in a second, but I want to make an observation here and tell me if you think I'm a knob jockey for this. Now, Ukraine for the last 4 days has shown large Russian movement. Say yesterday, we saw then large Russian movement around Avdiivka. Today has shown no movement anywhere and has finally shown movement up here. Now, firstly, we question, why was none of this shown for days? And could this be part of the information campaign to show only movement here, showing, well, there's movement here, and by this map, everything else has stopped, leading into even further success in this region beyond just what is getting gained. It's having success in other areas. Am I reading into that? Am I not? I don't know. So let's have a look at this. Now, coming up, at least the grey zone, onto the border of Sudzha here. Now, some maps were saying yesterday, even Russian sources, that it's right up to where the river is through here. Again, it's so difficult to get an idea, because I want to point something out, that presence does not mean occupation or holding. There is a vast difference to that. We saw this in the 2022 Russian offensive. Just because a vehicle is somewhere doesn't mean you're in control or are occupying that region. But a few differences in here. So we'll get then the Noel reports here that there has been footage of the Ukrainians getting very close to Kotornivo, which is way out here. So a long then way away. Now, let's have a look at a couple of other maps and see what is on it. This is then the Ukraine battle map, something that this map, Deep State, is not showing. Now, remember, this map has ties with the MOD. We don't know about these others and what their relationships are. But this is showing a few interesting things. One, that's showing that there's a complete link up between these, which is also shown on Syriac map. So that's interesting as well. And it's showing in the yellow, being basically grey zone areas where there's presence out into a number of different areas well behind the line, as well as where soldiers and DRG saboteur reconnaissance groups are working too. So this is just interesting to look at where the maps are showing just completely different in here, up to 430 square Ks. Some are saying more like 500. Now we'll look on Warmapper here. Now Warmapper is typically very pro-Ukraine and is very, very conservative towards any Russian gain. But he's saying here, only 3 hours ago, confirmed control of at least 155 square kilometers. For reference, Russia controls 150 squared Ks of Kharkiv. So the actual controlled area, he's saying, is fairly close. Advances are reported to be more extensive than shown. However, OBSEC is tight, and all this has been verified so far. So OBSEC is tight. We're seeing not that much come out of Ukraine. That's why there's far more videos of Ukrainian vehicles getting hit than some of where there's claims around Russia is like Russia in Volchansk actually had really good OBSEC for once, and Ukraine is having good OBSEC here as well. But like I've said here, control and presence are very different things. Just because there's a vehicle in X does not mean that is in control. Does that make sense? So it depends what is confirmed, probably around that 155K shown on this map and Warmapper. Where there is presence, probably then far larger than this. Now let's go have a look at Syriac and his write-up. So he has 4 that we're going to go over today. So this is looking then up into this northern part here. Now it can be a little bit harder to see, but we can see where some of this is pushing as well. If I can just get this here. So Kharkiv as well out into some of these other areas in the north too. Ukrainian Army advanced locality of this, can't pronounce it. During the last hours, Ukrainian incursions were registered at Kharkiv and here as well. However, these cannot be considered as breakthroughs as the troops withdrew. So out and then back as well. So that needs to be taken into account of control versus maybe a presence or past presence. As I mentioned the day before yesterday, let me move this across so you can see my head. The Ukrainian operation in Kursk is not affecting the development of Russian operations in Donbas, where the advances continue with the same rhythm and intensity. Russian reinforcements are beginning to accumulate in Kursk and Belarus and from other remote areas. Now, we're going to speak about Wagner PMC coming across from Belarus. However, these troops still are far from the border, and the Ukrainian advance is not expected to be slowed down until the end of the week at least, but these will start coming in dribs and drabs. That's why I'm saying that this is slow to move around. Could we see Ukraine then, bang, open something else up while they get into place? Potentially. During this time, Ukrainian forces will consolidate their positions in the first Russian localities if their real objective is to create a buffer zone in rival territory. They have to dig in. The point is that the objective of such an operation remains doubtful. Some argue that it may also be due to a simple propaganda battle, which is strange given the thorough preparation of such an action in time when the Ukrainian army is having trouble holding the front in Ukraine. It is difficult to know exactly what Ukraine's goal is, I should say, in this. Is it pure PR, as some will say? Is it to try and increase morale and have more motivation on the front line? In Donbas, we know that is struggling. Is it that, or are they trying to reach power plants? They're trying to reach railways. They're trying to dig in and create a buffer like Russia did in Volchansk. It'll all come through in time. On the other hand, the evacuation of Ukrainian populations along the Sumy border with Russia has begun, which may indicate that the area is going to be fully militarized in order to further boost the war effort there. Or else the preparation for a future battle in Sumy has already begun once the border operation has been reversed by the Russian command, which would not be ruled out, and Moscow would have its justification for carrying out in the future. So will we see, like we saw in Belgorod, we saw those pushes across from then the Ukrainian forces last year? Will we see maybe a buffer zone the other way if Russia is able to stop this? But this is going very quickly. Some may say too quickly, and the risk of getting overextended, not getting logistics, is a real threat. Now, 2300, Ukrainian army took control over these localities here. So further then expanding a lot more control than Ukraine's map then shows here, and that link up, like I spoke about in here, of course, is Sudza here, and this is this area here, but furthermore out to then the northwest here as well. It's a bit hard to see this map. Every time you zoom, you lose all the names of places. It's hard to get a bloody grasp on. But in addition, Ukrainian forces tried to envelop Sudzha through the capture of here. Russian army repelled the attack and expelled Ukrainian troops towards railway. Russian army continued the accumulation of reinforcements on the axis of Kotonevo and Kromsky-Briki. So Kotonevo will look at some geolocations here too. So tried to have an envelopment around the top of Sudzha here, and apparently was then pushed out. So again, we'll have more of an idea. Syriac, further update here. Ukrainian army has seized 458 square kilometres, so a lot more than Warmapper is saying. So, you know, this is why I present you stuff. I'm presenting it and you can believe or take what you will. And entered 33 localities in the Kursk Oblast. Undoubtedly, American or British intelligence was aware of Russia's attack of defence on this front, which has allowed Ukrainian forces to make deep advances into Russian territory. And like I said yesterday, the White House being like, I've reached out for comment. I fully believe that they had full awareness of this. Ukraine would not have risked cutting ties and supplies with these Western NATO countries that is keeping everything afloat in Ukraine, from the economy to the military to refugees. They would not have risked that, I don't believe, on a push like this, obviously with their vehicles donated. So I think they had some say in this. However, these are made by the Ukrainian DRG and special forces. These talk of even deeper advances here, so pushing right in. As for the former, the initial breakthrough caught many Russian detachments in that area unaware, some of which have been captured by the Ukrainian troops. A lot of POWs have been taken. Again, we don't know how many. Some are saying around 100, others are pushing way higher, and we do know DRG working well behind the line, like I spoke about. That's what I was told a year ago, and we reported a year ago that when the Russian liberation, whatever they called themselves, the Ukrainian forces were moving into Russia, it was a cover for this. The reason behind this operation is still unknown, but as time goes by, the possibility of the creation of a buffer zone is still unknown. It remains to be seen whether the consolidation of positions in the occupied territory will begin. Meanwhile, the build-up of forces in the Sumy border continues. So Russia's building up then forces in here as well. Ukraine is building up forces in here. Can Ukraine hold, consolidate, dig in those lines? Does Ukraine actually want to do that? And I spoke about this with Volchansk. I could see Ukraine completely withdrawing out of here once all the Russian stuff comes in anyway and push somewhere else. That could then occur also. Now, we went over a lot in that. Take a breath, Willie, too, and we're going to talk about this then too. So we talked about overextension and a counter. We spoke about that in Volchansk. Could have Russia been trying to do that there and never committed to it? Could Ukraine pull off that you push and you get them overextended, then you try something else somewhere else when they bring in then the reinforcements. Now, I've written here, it does look like if Ukraine doesn't consolidate positions, start to dig in and have, unless these like little spouts coming out somewhere, it does seem that Ukraine could potentially overextend like crazy. That's what we saw in 2022 in the beginning. Russia overextended dramatically and got cut off in areas and had very large losses, and Ukraine can't afford those losses in this. Now, I've said here in my notes, if I were Russia, very similar to what I've said if I were Ukraine when Russia pushed into Volchansk, what I'd be looking at is slowing it down, not pouring everything in to try and halt it just in place unless there's one specific goal, but it's not super clear on that specific goal. And then I would force somewhere else so hard to try and get them to maybe abandon this. And I spoke about this with Volchansk, that push back, try and get them to overextend and hit somewhere else. And what I said here is if I were Russia, I'd focus on slowing it down, inflicting casualties as pushes back, and then I'd focus all reserves and forces actually in Pokrovsk, then to force the hand of Ukraine to reinforce the reserves in the Donbas. And I've also put that this is the benefit that a numerically larger force can do. Smaller force, they have a lot of benefit in being highly mobile, maneuver warfare. Large forces, slow, clunky. This is why once that reinforcement arrives, maybe Ukraine will pull out and go somewhere else. But if Russia just go balls to wall in Pokrovsk, there's going to have to be troops moved. Could that be something in a larger strategic play here as well? So I spoke about in this that everyone is acting if Ukraine doesn't still have critical manpower shortages and ammo shortages, that these don't exist. That still exists. This could further exacerbate it. This is a big gamble. It may pay off brilliantly. It may go shockingly. So we spoke about a lot in here. Now, I did mention that Wagner, it does look like they're coming across. Now, some people have said, but I thought Wagner didn't exist. It's hard to get it. It sort of got broken apart and put under the MOD. There's still patches everywhere from Africa to Syria to Ukraine that we see. But of course, people hold these as almost like warrior morale patches too. So it's hard to know, because if someone has one on their body armor, if that's actually in X unit or just wearing it too. But we know there's still all these elements. Wagner has many different elements, everything from private, security for VIPs, through to operations under the SVR and FSB in areas, through to frontline soldiers. It's very, very large. But these video came up to Pfizer PMC Wagner returning from Belarus to Russia. Remember, they were there training the Belarusian soldiers to try and bring them up to a standard. Now, so the guy in the video here says who dies first is a F, ending in T. We're driving to Kursk to kill the same word. It'll be hot, but we will have a fire extinguisher. So those guys coming in. Now, it's funny, even reporting news, you can't say that word on YouTube, but you can be an active ODEP, but flip that word the other way. Like there's been a lot of guys exposed on this platform, and they've never been deplatformed. Interesting. But the Wagner is looking like they're coming across from Belarus and coming into here. So still a long way away, and we'll see if that has any effect. Now, many talk about Zap nuclear power plant and Kursk nuclear power plant. Sorry, I confused myself now. This is Zap here. Then, of course, Russia occupy Zap nuclear power plant down in here, Erdonadar. And there is one about 60 k's away in Kursk. Now, well, the Ukrainian forces are still a long way from here. You were talking maybe 15, 20, 25 k's depth in some areas of control, not just where DRGs have popped up. People have speculated, could Ukraine try and occupy that and then swap back? Now, what I will say on this is, one, it's a hell of a long way in. So the establishment of supply routes would need to be very, very solid. Those lines of communications need to be solid because Russia's going to be trying to hit that. And, of course, Russia is going to try and hold that as much as possible. So not only is it a long way away, we're talking 60 k's, they're going to be in for a hell of a fight once they get there. So the logistics needs to be bang on. Russia's going to have a lot more luck getting logistics into there too. And the further away Ukraine get from their own border, the more and more air superiority Russia's going to then have, because I can't see at this point if Ukraine's going to be wanting to cross fighter aircraft or air defense assets into Russia to support those missions. And even if they are, it's still going to be fairly long. The further something is away, the less deadly it is, including radars, due to weather, due to everything as well, even early warning. So is this a possibility? Yes. Is the logistics and the amount of troops and soldiers in going to be massive to that? Yes. You can't just go out in one spot. Ukraine's going to have to go out in the sausage maneuver and fatten. And if they were to get out to Kursk here, they can't, with the battle that they're going to have once they get there, it can't just look like this. It can't do that, because it's just going to get cut off or fabbed to death. It would have to look like a massive front line. Now, is this possible? Anything's possible. Is it realistic? I don't know. I think the NATO for an attack on a nuclear plant, when Ukraine's first point in the 10-point peace plan is nuclear safety, I don't know. I think that's unrealistic. Now, what is more realistic short-term to try and increase this is to try and get to a specific region and cut off the railway line to then have an effect on Russian supplies getting into here. Now, this is difficult to see on this bloody map. So we see Elgov up here. So again, still a long way away, I believe about a marathon distance. 52k, so a bit longer than a marathon, so 10 clicks on that. Kipchoge is about a bloody 35-minute run there. But this is a railway intersecting point from Kursk, Elgov, down to Sudzha here and Koronova. Now, we know there's presence of DRG in Koronova. We know there's presence of soldiers in Sudzha too. Now, of course, this is supplying a lot of the logistics down into Ukraine in these areas. I believe DRG elements try and get here to hit this. Of course, railways can be rebuilt very quickly, so you're going to need to have lots of attacks or get to there to try and hold these areas here too. So if you're wanting to hold here, this intersection has to have some effect on it too, from my reading and what others are saying too. And I agree with people's assessments here. We spoke about the POWs. We've spoken about, I've got a photograph here of Russian reserves then arriving. Let's get rid of that. What am I up to? I've basically got all my notes, but we still have a fair bit to go over. So we are seeing the Russian Air Force here dropping a lot of bombs in areas too. Now, a lot of these will be more guided munitions as well. But like we've spoken about, Ukraine need to keep moving, either forward or backwards or side to side. It doesn't matter, but I believe if they stop in this area, now that they're 10, 20, 30, wherever they get to, Russia's going to have then the ability to just fab those areas too, especially if it's not built in. They need to be continually moving. That's my assessment of it too. But of course, that logistics supply becomes very difficult, and rotation when the border here is, you're not going to have just smooth roads straight across the border. You don't have a right train track straight across the border. Like that, one of the first Intel guys thing I read was crossing the border is going to have a problem. Russia just may target on that border and thin out the supplies from there as well. So let's look at what, this is like the first official thing we've had from Ukraine. They've really not commented on this at all. But Mikhailo Podolyak, who said on this a lot because he says a lot of wild shit, an advisor to President Zelensky, has said this: any possible Ukrainian operations at the Russian border range will have an impact on Russia's society and improve Kyiv's position in future peace talks with Moscow. We know there could be peace talks later this year and impact on Russians themselves. A lot of saying you need to bring the war home to Russia. But what does that do? Does it bolster support for the messaging out of Kremlin, or does it bolster support for Ukraine? And I think it's probably just because someone has lost faith then in Putin, or is like, my kid died because you deployed him to the front line. At the end of the day, the one pulling the trigger on that was on the other side, and I think it actually could have maybe the opposite effect. Maybe it could actually have more support. This is the whole idea behind a false flag operation: is you have an attack, you have an attack in Moscow, say, you blame it on Ukraine, and therefore you go, and then you get a massive amount of volunteers. And we actually have seen more and more Russians have volunteered this year than last year into the forces. But he said the events in the Russian border region have a psychological impact on Russian society. They will, without a doubt. When you increase Russian losses, you ramp up their war costs, such as destroyed military equipment, lost territory, lost people. And will this affect how they perceive war? Without a doubt. But could it perceive the other way as an existential threat and have more support too? Because there's that element as well. Okay, geolocations, let's look over a few while we're talking in this area. My God, we are getting long in the tooth. So we have, I'm not going to be able to find it again as it took me forever, but I'll show you on a geolocation. So just out from here, we have about 8 clicks in. We have then a photograph of a Ukrainian bloke here, flexing in front of the sign to confirm. This is how we get the confirmations of where the front line actually is. Now, we do get a geolocation as well, some 16K, some 10 miles behind the line just here as well, of a Ukrainian vehicles being struck with munitions too. Now, something I want to speak about in this, we're seeing a lot of this footage, we're not seeing much on the other side, but we're also seeing a lot of ISR assets as drones, like my first guy spoke about, that there wasn't suppression of this. As well, we're actually seeing a lot of Iskanders being used by Russia, and some have pointed out how many can they actually afford to continue losing. Now, civilians on Ukraine's side, let's talk about this for a second. Now, just because someone's angry at Putin doesn't mean that they will be sympathetic or then fight for Ukraine. Remember, in here you've had civilians killed, we've seen cars shot up, we're seeing civilian areas get shelled to shit, and this is what happened for a lot of the pro-Russian population, say in areas in Ukraine too. With Russia's invasion, swung a lot of people back onto the other side, onto being for Ukraine's. Now, what I believe, the Russian Legion stuff last year, that was in my opinion, to try and rally support for an insurgency inside Russia to then have like a larger force, maybe a coup, maybe DRG elements to go against the Kremlin and like a new Russia. Now, what we can say is by objectively, if that was the goal, which I believe it probably was, it failed. Objectively, you can say it failed because it never really started that. It may have had here and there, but not massive overall for the cost of those cross-border operations. Now, this is interesting. This is from War Has a Thousand Fathers about counter-insurgency, so coin practices around the world. Now, what we can do in this is you can actually just reverse what a good counter-insurgency practice is for then good insurgency practices. Now, what I've done here is I've highlighted some of the good ones, some of the bad ones, and you need this. And you can break down this full thing, and basically mathematically, that if you have an overwhelming amount of good ones, you will succeed in either your insurgency or your counterinsurgency. But if you have even or less, most of the time, I believe from memory, 8 of the 30 they had didn't go this way, but the absolute majority went directly in the way of basically the mathematical equation here. So if you have excessive collateral damage, disproportionate use of force, so like areas maybe involved Chansk. Now, of course, I'm meaning people turn to the side, but for trying to have an insurgency in areas like this that have legitimacy in the area, you're trying to have at least partial democracy. These are good short-term investments and improvements. Majority of the population of the area, conflict supported or favoured by the insurgency or counterinsurgency for, and contested air dominance. That your external occupier, again, one of the primary bad ones. So either way, that's going to be happening. Resettled or removed from civilian population is a bad practice as well. So moving people out. And what you can see I'm getting at here is both those. Now I'm saying this is different, but again, people are saying this will rally people behind it. I think we can look at that this may have the opposite effect of that potential. Now we're going to look at what a guy on Twitter has said, Ukrainian I believe officer, he is reserve officer, and he talks a lot, and I like what he says. Even if I disagree with it, I like people who are critical thinkers as well. And we need to look at what The Economist has said about what's happening then in the Donbas while this is going on, not to forget about this. Now, the operational time underscores Russia's continued inability to swift respond to battlefield developments, a weakness evident in the Kharkiv counter-offensive. So Russia's ability to have something quickly is definitely not as quick as maybe it should be. That's what you get in a large military. This operation has brought a breath of fresh air to those who have viewed the battlefield as static, losing battle where Ukraine is slowly retreating under heavy fire. So creating an atmosphere of impending doom. So like I said yesterday, Ukraine just can't keep stepping back west on Avdiivka. The morale, the motivation was absolutely shattered. Without a doubt, this incursion has sparked some hope and optimism, not only in Ukraine, but also in the West. That people now, look, all the YouTubers were not posting any maps. Look at them all bloody post maps now. There's doom and gloom, and this has sparked some motivation, some optimism. But again, the gamble in this is things could potentially go wrong quickly too. But let's continue here. It remains an indisputable fact that the capture of a significant number of prisoners of war, some of whom appear to be conscripted, like I spoke about, is a major humanitarian win for Ukraine, being able to then swap those back, get their own guys back, especially if you're giving back a conscript and you get some like full-time soldier back, your ability to fight on the front will be improved. In this context, conscript soldiers hold a particular value, as Russian society is generally more sensitive about the plight of conscripts than that of contract soldiers, because it's far more unpopular when you tell someone they're going somewhere rather than volunteering to fight. This is why I've brought into question the effectiveness of conscripts versus volunteers for morale, motivation, psychological as well. What is Ukraine's Kursk invasion worth the effort? So he's questioning, how will this be if Ukraine need to widen the incursion if they continue, which could then slow the pace due to limited resource and brigades? How much is Ukraine actually willing to pour into this? Overextension poses risks beyond logistics. It complements the ability to provide adequate air defence coverage for advancing troops. So the further away you get, the more bubbled out, air defence could be limited. That's what we know the main overmatch for Russia is. Ukraine has a difficult choice: either reposition its scarce and valuable air defence assets into Kursk or leave its advancing forces without proper cover. So if they then allocate these into Kursk, other areas are just going to have free range of Russian movement too. Again, very, very hard. Tough dilemma to halt or dig in to retreat back to Ukraine if Russia are able to assemble a large enough force to try and counter or stop this. Ukrainian forces slowly retreat in the Pokrovsk region. There's no stabilisation or reserves currently on site. So in Pokrovsk, it is very difficult still. So far, there's no evidence that Russia is moving the main units from Donetsk to Kursk, casting doubt on the theory that this incursion could relieve pressure on Donetsk. Like I spoke about, could this map be used as a Everything is stopped everywhere else, and only this is moving. It's too early to draw conclusions. Such movements could occur in the future. However, as of today, there's no public information that indicates that Russia has shifted its main forces or decreased pressure in the Pokrovsk direction. So nothing is being shown that this is having direct effect on Pokrovsk other than maybe psychological, which, don't underestimate, is very important, but I don't think it will affect the Russian morale in Pokrovsk themselves if they're still getting that ground. Nor, I don't think if you're a Ukrainian getting shelled to shit by Fabs in Pokrovsk, you're going to really care about what is happening here to a degree either. Does that then make sense? It's unclear how extended front lines and prepared positions with stretched logistics would be more favourable than the more established positions in Donbas. If Ukrainian troops choose to withdraw, it raises a question whether the operation was worth the effort, especially given the need to redeploy elements from several brigades in the Donbas direction. So we do know that there was definitely, by his thing, a pull-out from some Ukrainian elements and reserve elements. Now, it may not be guys off the front, but could it be reserve elements that are meant to rotate to give relief to these guys in the front? Absolutely. To then launch this. And it doesn't seem like Russia has done that similarly, which of course is the benefit of having just a numerically larger force. Now, The Economist has written this about Donbas, a quick one that I believe is day old. The Ukrainian security source in Pokrovsk attributes much of the downturn to a devastating hold-up in weapons of US Congress, but most of the pressing current problem is manpower and the failure of Ukraine's mobilization program. Russia has more men. Morale in the Ukrainian ranks has dropped accordingly. Now, this is only within the last day or two as well. Commander of the 24th Brigade, transferred from New York to Chasov Yar, so absolute hottest areas, says battalions in his brigade are now fighting with just 20 people in position, less than platoon size. And here he has voiced anger towards Alexander Sursky, Ukraine's commander-in-chief. He says it's madness. We are fighting with cooks, electricians, and mechanics. So saying they're rationing everything, large casualties, very few people. So that's where I've said that one of the options for Russia here could just be slow down this as much as you can. So don't let Kursk or massive areas drop, like I said about Vovchansk area, Kharkiv, Ukraine. Go balls to wall in Pokrovsk, and you may force a withdrawal then out of here. So let's then actually have a look at the maps and see where things are changing. Now, nothing is changing on then this deep state map, as I previously stated, but we'll come then down into the Avdiivka front. Now, yesterday I saw a lot of movement here. Today by Syriac, we're just seeing a filling in just around this top section here. You can't read this here, but just this town here, he's saying, came under control of the Russian forces of further expansion there directly in the direction, take it as you will, in Vovchansk. He also then says that Ukraine actually took back positions in New York as well. That's the wrong map, sorry, here we go. That took back positions in New York on the Donetsk front, showing just here, right near where that flag we showed yesterday then was. I'm not sure if it's the exact same spot, but saying Ukraine had an advancement here too. And then in Rozdelivka, which I'll show you, is just above Bakhmut. So Rozdelivka in here, that the Russian forces have pushed across the train track here, enveloping some of this area. So pushing out in here, trying to envelop Fedorovka here, again, not really sure. Now, what we have spoken about is, could this overall operation in the north not only try to thin out or make ground, but make ground in some way to swap back to the Russians if there is peace negotiations or peace stuff in the future? It's what a lot of people are running with. What I will say with that, when we're talking, let's say, even if we say 500 square kilometres, 1,000 square kilometres, overall, even if they get 3-to-1 Ks, it's not going to be a huge difference if you're swapping back kilometre for kilometre ground, if that then makes sense. Anyway, we have a bit of an update from Andriy Yermak, sorry, Yusov's the wrong one, who spoke to European Pravda, particularly about this. That Russia could participate, and could, because I believe if it's going there with the 10-point peace plan, unless there's dramatic shifts, and this isn't enough, it's happening in Kursk yet, Russia won't attend, but could participate in the second peace summit, to whom a plan for the implementation of the 10 points of the peace formula would be handed over. You can Google it, I'm sure Putin knows what those are. But the participation of the aggressor state, the President Zelensky and his team always say the same thing. The participation of Russia, a representative in the second summit, is possible. To whom this plan, the implementation of the 10-point peace formula, can be handed over. Such a possibility exists, but that does not mean that at the second summit, there will be the start of negotiations with Russia. We want this meeting where the plan could be handed over. So printing them out and handing them over to Russia, rather than actual negotiation to peace to take place in the Ukraine peace format and presence of those responsible states that endorse the plan. So whoever endorsed the plan, then handing it over to, of course, like the communique, a lot of the Global South didn't as well, China, India, things like this. The second summit going to take place only once a joint plan is ready. The formula consists of 10 points and announced by the president more than 2 years ago. I've highlighted 2 years because a lot has changed 2 years ago. 2 years ago, Russia was absolutely on the back foot, getting smashed in Kharkiv, Kherson. Now, it does seem again that they're in at least the back foot on some areas, but not absolutely everywhere. With, like we said, there's still critical manpower shortages, weapon shortages that will become more and more relevant the longer things go on as well. So again, 10 points. The first one's nuclear security, which we spoke about before. If you're trying to swap back power plants, I just don't believe, I don't know, maybe, but I don't see how that's going to be sold to the US or the UK with the risk of that as well. And the amount of effort Russia would actually put in to try and hold a single point. It's much easier to try and hold a single point than much broader. And you're going to be 60 Ks in working a wide breadth. There's going to have to be troops everywhere moved. 2 years ago, things are different. What is victory? Victory is a restoration of territorial integrity of Ukraine, ensuring the security of our sovereignty and return of all our people, accountability for war criminals. So not only would you going across going, yep, these are the 10-point peace plan, but you also then need to hand over, Putin and Maria Belova, Gerasimov and Shoigu all have arrest warrants, I believe. So hand over all your senior command and your president as well. Okay. Obtaining the necessary compensation. So now you're paying for the damage of which you've done. Return of Ukrainian children, and this would be POWs as well in that. I can't see that as a bad thing in any scope, but victory is a new security structure in Europe, and Ukraine would definitely play one of the leading roles. So in this, Ukraine is taking 10-point peace plan. They want all the people to be, all the perpetrators of this to be handed over, including the president and senior rank, compensation, so pay for all of it, all the ground back, and join NATO EU. Now, what I say in this is none of that is possible at this point in time without massive victories of Sevastopol, Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kharkiv, pushes in Kursk. That's a lot to ask at this point in time. Does that make sense? Sorry, I actually just got a message then from one of my guys. So you know what I mean? Like, I don't. If this is what they're running into this with, I just don't believe China, Russia, India will attend. But I guess that can be sold as, well, we were serious about it and you didn't even then attend. Okay, I don't know if I can share this yet, but I will ask him if I can share it, and then he's one of my guys on the ground, and then I'll talk about it at least in tomorrow's video. There's a bit of a hook for you. I am sorry this went so long. This was meant to be bloody short because I don't have my teleprompter. Look after yourself. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Have a fantastic day. Thank you. Bye-bye.